The NFL has a long off season, which makes it easy to forget about certain players. But I'd like to help you with that. Here are 5 guys with upside that your friends forget about in fantasy drafts. In 2021, this man right here, Devin Singletary, was the number 2 running back the final 5 weeks of the year in fantasy football. He averaged 20.4 opportunities per game during that time, and look at the total yardage: 89, 96, 78, over 100, and then you get into the playoffs and he's still producing. Now, Singletary's 20.4 opportunities per game during that stretch was more than DeAndre Swift's last year. And it wasn't minor. He saw 15% more opportunities than Swift did. Swift saw 17.6 per game between your targets and carries, your total opportunities. Now, Singletary's usage didn't stop in week 18. He played 85% and then 100% of the snaps, fellas, in the Bills' 2 playoff games. Now, during this time, he handled every single running back touch and opportunity except for one. 35 of 36 in the playoffs. Quite simply, Singletary was the dude in the most crucial time of the season, and he produced. In the playoffs, he scored 24.4 fantasy points and 15.1. Both of those were top 4 at the running back position, which means that Singletary's final 6 weeks of the season, starting right here in week 14 all the way through the playoff games, he was a top 10 back every time. So given this information, you would assume that he's going to be valued in 2022, right? Well, hold on a second, because it's not happening. Singletary currently goes in the 9th round of drafts as the 34th running back off the board. Drafters are concerned with the Bills' new running back, James Cook out of Georgia, who was drafted in the 2nd round this year. But here's why you shouldn't be worried. Buffalo attempted to sign this man, J.D. McKissic, in the offseason, but they failed. And now they envision Cook to be their McKissic, meaning eventually Cook will see some passing down usage. But check this out. If they envision a J.D. McKissic role, which they've stated for James Cook, McKissic saw 4.4 carries per game. That's not a scary role to Devin Singletary's workload. So feel more than comfortable drafting Singletary in the 9th round. And you should also consider this next guy who goes 3 rounds later. I give you a wide receiver who saw 126 targets last year, yet he goes in round 12. And if you go through his game log, starting at week 1 when he sees 9 targets, you scroll down and you're getting these 14, 12 target games. Throughout the entire season, he earned 8 or more targets in 10 games, double-digit games last year. He was elite at commanding targets. His name is Jakobi Meyers, and despite last year's success, Meyers currently goes off the board as the wide receiver 62. Even though last year, and fellas, open up those earbuds, let's get the Q-tips out. Last year, he finished as the wide receiver 35, and he was as unlucky as it gets. Now, according to a study that Fantasy Data did over the last 10 years, the top 36 wide receivers average a 5.7% touchdown rate. But meanwhile, Jakobi Meyers' touchdown rate last year as a top 36 wide receiver was just 2.4%. Now, here's another way to look at this. Based on his 126 targets, Meyers was expected to score 7.3 touchdowns, but he only scored 2. And if you were to give him just the average touchdown rate from last year, instead of finishing as the 35th overall wide receiver, he would have finished top 15. And not to mention, his chemistry with Mac Jones is only going to get better, especially as Jones goes from a rookie to a sophomore in his 2nd year with Bill Belichick. Now, let me tell you why the 66th overall wide receiver last year is worth a 4th round pick this year. Allen Robinson had the worst year of his career in 2021. But the question is he even to blame? Because I say no. Robinson's target quality last year ranked 77th in the league, and only 71% of his targets were catchable, meaning that 29% were deemed uncatchable. Nobody could have even caught those balls, even if you're 8 feet tall. Plus, the Bears' play calling was extremely limiting for wide receivers. See for yourself. So Robinson's average target distance was 55th in the league. It was only 10 yards downfield. It's really hard to have big plays when that's the case. And here's an example of this right away in week 1 last year. Robinson, he has 6 catches. He sees double-digit targets, but none of those targets are more than 9 yards down the field. How are you supposed to have upside when this is the play calling? Now, here's the good news. Robinson was still top 15, 14th overall at beating man coverage last year, which actually ranked ahead of Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson last year. And this is where it gets good. He's now playing with Matthew Stafford, who was the #1 quarterback against man coverage last year. So without a doubt, Robinson is worth a 4th round pick as the number 22 wide receiver off the board. And this next wide receiver is worth a dart throw in round 17, because Nico Collins, in 10 games where Davis Mills started last year, scored 2 times his average fantasy points. And he ranks 2nd on the Texans in targets, and he had 24 more than the guy in 3rd place in Chris Conley. And you cannot overlook the historic trade that the Texans made to acquire Collins. Houston gave up the 2nd most draft capital ever to get a 3rd round pick. They ended up swapping their 3rd round pick for that year, and then they gave up 2 more 4th round picks in the 2021 draft and the 2024 draft just to take Nico Collins. A trade like this incentivizes an above average job security for Nico. Now, I must let you know that the Texans did did draft a second-round wide receiver out of Alabama this year in John Mechie. But the problem for Mechie is he's expected to miss the start of the season, meaning that he's going to miss all of minicamp and training camp, OTAs, the preseason because of an injury. And he suffered that injury on December 4th of 2021 when he tore his ACL, which is normally a 10 to 12 month recovery. And you can see here in my top 200, I have Nico Collins 24 spots right here above his average draft position. I think he's worth a 15th round pick, but he goes in the 17th. Now, if you want to beat your friends in your fantasy league this year and use my top 200, my tiers, my rankings, and a whole lot more, you could do so by clicking the link in the description and following these simple steps, and then I'll send you my supreme cheat sheet updated weekly so you could smack your friends around. So click the link in the description to learn more. So we discussed why Nico Collins' job is safe, and so is this next wide receivers. And it's all about the money for Kenny Golladay, who the Giants last offseason signed to a 4-year, $72 million deal. And unlike last season when his salary cap hit was just $4 million, this year it's over $21 million, which clearly incentivizes the Giants to use him in the offense. And now check this out. Kenny Golladay, yes, he had a letdown season last year. Not a lot of people want to draft him, maybe including yourself, but hopefully this will clear some things up. Because in 85% of his games, if you go week by week and look at the Roto World blurbs or just look at the Giants beat writer reports, it's going to show that he had an injury designation, and you can see those injuries here. He had an injury designation in 85% of those games. It was a hamstring, it was a hip, it was a knee, it was a chest, it was everything under the sun. But now Kenny Golladay is healthy and he has an improved coaching staff. And here's another thing to consider. His target quality ranked 79th in the league last year. Bottom 10%, it was awful. However, the Giants drafted 3 offensive linemen this year, including top 5 overall pick stud out of Alabama, Evan Neal. And this is important because it's finally going to give Daniel Jones time to throw. Jones' protection rate last year was bottom 10% in the league, 25th in the NFL. You can expect that to get better in 2022. So Golladay is currently going as the wide receiver 57, which is after Michael Gallup and Robert Woods, even though those guys are coming off of ACL tears and probably won't be ready for the start of the season. So consider Golladay in round 11 of your drafts. Now, these are 5 guys that you want to get because your friends aren't even thinking about them. But if you want to see the tight ends that you have to avoid this year, then check out this video right here. And by the end of the season, your friends will be like, how did this guy know all the good players?